We're moving in this section from the seal period into the trumpet period, and as you can see from the screen here, we're going to be looking at the first 4 trumpets as recorded in Revelation chapter 8 from verse 7 through to verse 12. Just a quick look back at what we've done so far. We looked first of all at the seals, which were prophesying events from when John received the prophecy in AD 96 through to 312 into the days of Constantine, and the seals revealed internal events that were to take place in the Roman world. The 6th seal is a very important one because it is all about the first of the 3 great earthquakes which are revealed in the prophecy, and these great earthquakes were when some great change took place in the Roman world. It was in the days of Constantine once again when the government changed from paganism to Christianity. When the 7th seal was opened, that, if you remember, was when John saw 7 angels with 7 trumpets, and they were ready to blow them. You might remember that they prepared themselves to sound to begin with, and that was when the Roman authorities were allowing the barbarian nations actually to come into the empire, and it began to weaken the army because they were invaded by these barbarian nations eventually. We might ask the question, why do we change the symbol then? Why did the prophets change the symbol from seals to trumpets? And when we think about this, it all fits together very well, really, because when we unseal something, we find out what's happening inside, and that's what happened in the prophecy. The opening of the seals revealed what was happening inside the Roman Empire. But when the trumpets were blown, one purpose of the trumpet was to summon armies to prepare for war. We see an example in Jeremiah 51. Set ye up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations against her, that's against Babylon, call together against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Minai and Ashkenaz. So the trumpet was used to summon armies to the battle, and that's what's happening in the prophecy here. The historian Gibbon, in his book Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he identifies 4 main events which brought about the collapse of the western part of the Roman Empire, and that is what we're considering here in this trumpet section. So first of all, he said it was attacked by the Visigoths, which is the First Trumpet, then the Vandals, which is the Second Trumpet, the Huns, the Third Trumpet, and finally the Ostrogoths, which brought about the collapse of the empire in the west. We see the movements of these barbarian nations on this map here, produced by the National Geographic Society, and we see the 4 principal ones. There are others, but these were the main ones which brought about the collapse. First of all, the Visigoths, and we can trace the red line there through into Italy, and eventually they settled down in Spain. And then we've got the Vandals. They attacked from the north there, and they went down into northern Africa, and they attacked the empire from that standpoint. The Huns, they marched across Europe, and they once again attacked the western part of the Roman Empire. And finally we've got the Ostrogoths, who finished the job off, as it were. Just before we look at the details, let's consider this phrase, the third part. It crops up a lot in this section. So when the prophecy speaks about the third part, it's actually speaking about 1/3 of the Roman world, because the Roman world collapsed really in 3 sections. First of all, we've got the western part. That's what we're considering here. The first 4 trumpets brought about the collapse of the western part of the Roman Empire. And we're reading Revelation chapter 8 and at verse 7 how the first angel sounded, and it was the third part of the trees that were burnt up. And then in verse 8 we've got the same sort of idea. It's the third part of the sea that became blood. And in verse 9, the third part of the creatures that were in the sea died. We've got this third part, and it's speaking about 1/3 of the Roman world that was destroyed at this time. The next section to fall was the Middle East and the rest of North Africa, and that's dealt with in the Fifth Trumpet that we shall look at another time. Interestingly enough, the third part is not mentioned as the Fifth Trumpet is being blown, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But first of all, the Sixth Trumpet brought about the collapse of the complete collapse of the Roman Empire, because it was the eastern part of the empire that fell last. And that's recorded in chapter 9 of Revelation. And if we look at verse 15, 4 angels were loosed and were prepared, etc. And a third part of men were affected by that. And again at verse 18, by these was the third part of men killed. So that third part crops up there as well. So why is it that the third part is not mentioned during the Fifth Trumpet? And one possible explanation of that is, when we consider what happened during that Fifth Trumpet period, it was the Arabs that were unstoppable at that time. They not only invaded their third, as it were, but they went right across northern Africa into Spain and penetrated deep into Europe, and they were eventually stopped by the Franks. That's possibly why the third part is not mentioned during the operation of the Fifth Trumpet. We read the First Trumpet, Revelation chapter 8 and at verse 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So what does this speak about? Let's just say first of all, it was the Visigoths that we saw was the first of these barbarian nations to bring about the collapse of the Western Empire. Hail and fire mingled with blood, and we see the same symbols elsewhere in Scripture. For example, in Isaiah 28, speaking about Assyria coming against Israel, behold, the Lord hath a mighty and strong one, which as a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall he cast down to the earth with the hand. So there we've got the Assyrians described in the same way as hail, a great hailstorm, which brings about destruction. It was hail and fire, and once again fire symbolises destruction. We read here in Joel chapter 2, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. And we've got the same sort of thing happening in the Apocalypse. Before them it was like the Garden of Eden, and behind them a desolate wilderness. The third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burnt up. The contemporary writer Claudian actually referred to Alaric and his armies as the hailstorm, and we've got another example of contemporary writers and historians using exactly the same symbology that the prophecy used. The difference is, of course, the writers were looking at what was happening at the time, whereas the prophecy was foretelling what was about to happen. So if we just go back to the map here, we see the Visigoths. What they did first of all is they tried to attack Constantinople. They had to go at the eastern part of the empire, but they were not able to overcome it. And so they turned west, as the red line shows us there, in AD 395, down into Greece, and on the way up the coast here, an absolute trail of devastation as they marched through the land. And the red line shows us that they went into Italy and right across through to Rome there, and caused great devastation there. And eventually they settled down, as it were, in what we know as Spain. As the map shows us, that's the kingdom of the Visigoths. That was part of the Roman Empire, and we see it's gradually being destroyed at this time. The third part of the trees was burnt up, and the green grass at this stage. The trees sometimes represent the leaders and the rulers. If we turn to the book of Judges, we've got a parable there, haven't we, about the trees of the field. Judges chapter 9 and at verse 8. The trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them, and they said unto the olive tree, Reign thou over us. Right, so the trees can be referred to as rulers, whereas the grass can be referred to as the people. If we go to Isaiah chapter 40 and at verse 6, we know these words well. The voice said, Cry, and he said, What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all the goodness thereof as the flower of the field. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, because the Spirit of the Lord bloweth upon it. Surely the people is grass. So we've got symbology here describing the leaders, not the total leaders. This is not the sun, moon and stars, but they're referred to as trees and grass. That's one way of looking at this in a symbolic way. We can also see, if we look at the areas that were devastated at this time, there were actually areas where there was a lot of trees and grass. So we can see, as it were, two ways of looking at this. The Chronicle records here, 24th of August 410, for 3 days German hordes have roamed the streets of Rome, burning and pillaging the greatest city in the known world, under their leader King Alaric. A quick look at the details of this. 408, Rome besieged, and there was dreadful famine in the city at that time. As we say here, the first time for over 600 years that Rome had been attacked. It was so bad, similar to the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans. It's almost as though the Romans are getting a taste of their own medicine here. The inhabitants eat the flesh of those who die. Eventually Alaric accepts a ransom to retreat, which he does, for a while, but the negotiations for peace fail, and in 409 Alaric is back at the gates of Rome once again. 410 the city falls, and the Goths are in there plundering the city for 3 days. But it was the same year that Alaric died, and after that the Goths retreated, and as we've seen already, they eventually settled down in Spain. Here's an artist's impression of what these barbarians might have looked like. They were indeed fearsome individuals in comparison with the civilized people of the Roman Empire. That's why they were called barbarians. So the second trumpet, we move to the second trumpet now, Revelation chapter 8, and at verse 8, the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain, burning with fire, was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures that were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. We see here that there's actually an emphasis on the sea, and we shall see why in just a moment that is the case here. So this is all about the Vandals attacking the western part of the Roman Empire. A great mountain, and is another symbol that is used elsewhere in Scripture for leaders and rulers. Behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyest all the earth, and I will stretch out mine hand upon thee. So we've got an example in Jeremiah here, the same sort of symbology that we've got in Revelation 8 verse 8. This mountain, that it was burning with fire once again, and fire, as we know, is a symbol of destruction. Isaiah 30, behold, the name of the Lord cometh from far, burning with his anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation, and his tongue as a devouring fire. It was cast into the sea, and as we've seen, the sea figures largely in this particular trumpet period. We see why when we look at what the Vandals did. Right, they started way up in the north there, and it was round about 400 AD when they first went into the Roman world. But they go right down into North Africa and set up base, as it were, there, and that becomes the kingdom of the Vandals. And it's from that vantage point, as it were, Carthage, that with the powerful navy that they had, they attacked all those parts of the Roman Empire as shown on the map there. And obviously the important one was Rome. They attacked Rome once again. The Chronicle records once again Rome, June 455. The Vandal army, laden with booty and taking thousands of captives, is leaving Rome. This is the second attack of the city in 50 years, the first being in 410 at the hand of the Visigoths. The Vandal king Gesseric took the city with an army laden from the powerful Vandal fleet. And the Chronicle says there, now Gesseric's fleet is roaming freely throughout the western Mediterranean with rich island prizes at his mercy. So once again we see it was by sea that this was done. Here's the Penguin Atlas showing the same thing basically. We can see the Visigothic Kingdom there in Spain, and now we've got the Vandal Kingdom. The different parts of the Western Empire just gradually being eaten up by these barbarian nations. And this map also shows how that it was from Carthage that the ships set sail to attack the different parts of the empire. Just a comment here about this kingdom in Italy. It's called Attila Kingdom. We read here that he was a soldier in the Roman army, although he was not a Roman. He was one of these barbarians who ascended through the ranks to general and was then chosen to rule. The Roman Senate approved Attala's leadership and awarded him the honorary status of a patrician. He was successful in maintaining order, culture, and the last vestiges of civilization of the Roman Empire in the West, which, considering the time in which he reigned, was an impressive achievement. So we see here that even the king who was in control of Italy there, he was not a Roman, although the Romans acknowledged him. Another way in which the western part of the empire was gradually being eroded away here. So it was a great mountain burning with fire that was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. So we've got obviously destruction and warfare and loss of life. Gibbon describes it, he says, Genseric animated his daring Vandals to embrace a mode of warfare which would render every maritime country accessible to their arms. So we come to the third trumpet now, chapter 8 and at verse 10, where we read, "The third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter." So here we got an attack by the Huns led by Attila. So we see it's the green line this time. We put number 3 there because it's the third trumpet, where Attila marched right across Europe there. He was absolutely unstoppable. He was victorious until he arrived here at Chalons, where he was defeated for the first time. And we begin to see what the symbology is about. It was a star falling from heaven, and of course we get the same idea here in Isaiah chapter 14, this well-known example. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations?" So this idea of a star falling from heaven is describing a ruler who has been very great, very victorious, but is now falling in power. And that's exactly what we see when Attila attacked the western part of the Roman world. We read here, "The king of the Huns who invaded the Roman Empire with an army that included Franks, Vandals and Ostrogoths. He was practically unbeaten in Europe until the Battle of Chalons in 451, when his forces were annihilated by the son of Theodoric." It's a Cambridge Medieval History who puts it this way: "The empire of Attila was of too ephemeral a nature to be crucially dangerous. His attack on the west was like the passing of a transitory meteor." So the history books using once again the same symbol as the prophecy. Medieval history continues, "But the meteor was not yet exhausted, and Italy had to feel in 452 what Gaul had experienced in 451. Attila marched from Pannonia and over the Julian Alps, and it mentioned there a number of places that were attacked and decimated. But if we look to second part of that quote. It says, "It remained one of the problems of history why the Huns refrained from attacking Rome and retired instead to the Danube. His troops, after all, were suffering from famine, and an Italian summer was infecting them with fever." So here we see once again this star that was falling when it attacked the western part of the empire, and he never actually got as far as Rome. He retired from doing that. We see some of the places here mentioned on that last quote, and we can see the area that he operated in, really. It was where all the main rivers of this part of Europe had their fountain, to quote the prophecy. In other words, where the spring was which started the river off. And it was this area that Attila and his armies attacked and decimated the rivers and fountains of waters. So once again we can see a literal aspect here, as well as a figurative one. We say, well, why apply some detail literally, like rivers and fountains of waters, but other in symbol, i.e. a burning mountain falling to the earth? And this is the way that prophecy is. We consider a very well-known example of prophecy, the Olivet prophecy by the Lord Jesus Christ. And there it is, as recorded in Luke chapter 21. "There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars." That is symbol. "Upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity." That is literal. "The sea and the waves roaring." And that represents the nations. It is symbol once again. "Men's hearts failing them for fear." That's literal. "The powers of heaven shall be shaken." That is once again symbol. "And then shall they will see the Son of Man," literally, "coming in a cloud," but not a literal cloud. And then we've got a symbol again. "He will come with power and great glory," literal. So prophecy is like this. It's not all in symbol. It's a mixture of symbol and literal things. And what we have to do, of course, is to try and sort out which parts are symbolic and which are literal. Brother Robert says here, figuratively, he, that's Attila, made the waters of public and private life bitter everywhere, with fatal effect to the drinkers. Wormwood was an appropriate name for the agent of such effects. So there's the verse which speaks. It mentions wormwood twice, and the waters were made bitter. We can see how the waters were made bitter. Life was made bitter for the people who lived in this area. He imposed monumental taxes on the people in the Roman Empire. At one stage he actually demanded half the entire region of the empire, and when this was refused, he laid siege to and destroyed many cities, and loss of life was great. So we see how Attila behaved at this time to make life bitter for the people. That word wormwood is the Greek absinthos, and actually means bitterness. Interestingly enough, there is a river of the same name in the region of Illyricum where Attila ruled. So the first trumpet was on the trees and grass. The second affected the Maritime area, if we can put it that way. And now the third trumpet is on the rivers and fountains of waters, and they were made bitter. And we can see that that has more or less finished off the western part of the Roman Empire. So we come finally to the fourth trumpet. It's on the screen there. The fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and a third part of the moon, and a third part of the stars. So we've got the complete collapse. The sun, moon and stars, they are the overall rulers. The Romans no longer in control of this part of the Roman Empire. This is what the Chronicle of the World says. Glorious Goth is master of the West. The Ostrogoths, now the most powerful nation in Western Europe, following their annexation of southeastern Gaul, the move aimed at containing the Franks, puts the Ostrogoth king Theodoric in control of a kingdom that stretches from Gaul to Illyricum, in other words, the whole of the western part of the empire. Here we see the Penguin Atlas of world history, recording events at this time. We note we've got the kingdom of the Visigoths, that was the first trumpet. We've got the Vandal kingdom, that's the second trumpet. And now we've got the Ostrogothic kingdom, the fourth trumpet. The Visigoths, by the way, are the Western Goths. The Ostrogoths are the Eastern Goths. But we say, what about the other trumpet? The star has fallen and the meteor is burnt out, so they don't seem to figure in this map at all. We see two maps there, once again from the Penguin Atlas of world history. Back in 395, the one at the top, we've got, it's all the Roman Empire, the western part and the eastern part. But the map below, at 526 AD, the eastern part of the Roman Empire is still intact, but the western part, why, it's gone. It's been destroyed completely by these barbarian nations. And so John says, I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the three angels which are yet to sound. And so the fifth trumpet, the sixth and the seventh trumpet are also called in the prophecy the first woe, the second woe and the third woe. And it's this that we're going to look at in the next session. Trumpets 5, 6 and 7. That will complete the trumpet section in the prophecy. So we'll look at that next time.